With over 8 million Panzerfausts produced, Germany flooded the battlefield with one of the most effective anti-tank weapons of the war. But by the time they were handed out in ruined cities to anyone between 16 and 60, their use had turned into something darker than the war itself. You've seen this weapon in the movies, but now you'll hear its full story. So let's start from the very beginning, on how and why this thing was even created. Panzerfaust in German literally means armor fist in their creative style of naming weapons. Everything began on the Eastern Front by 1942, when after invading the Soviet Union and decimating older light BT series of tanks, the Germans got a "Houston, we have a problem" moment. When the T-34 and KV-1 appeared, they were for the time much better armed and armored than most German tanks, and almost invulnerable to most early German anti-tank weapons. The first main weapon for dealing with armor the Germans had was the 37mm towed anti-tank gun, which for its effectiveness got the not-so-encouraging nickname the Door Knocker. This gun was also mounted on most of the Panzer IIIs, which were supposed to be tank killers, while the Panzer IVs and earlier 2s and 1s and self-propelled artillery would deal with infantry and fortifications. Now, the Germans already knew, when the war began, that rapid advancements in armor would surely make the 37mm obsolete, and they were already preparing the 50mm anti-tank gun and very soon after the 75mm. But the problem was pushing them out in towed configuration, or replacing the older guns on tanks in time. Besides anti-tank guns, there were also anti-tank rifles, which were somewhat effective at close ranges against the light armor found early in the war. They were a mass-used, cheaper solution than a towed gun, something infantry could carry. But now they were also very much surpassed as ever heavier tanks arrived. The Germans also had magnetic anti-tank charges and mines for destroying tanks. But they were more like last-ditch solutions, since someone had to literally climb onto an enemy tank to use them effectively. So now the Germans wanted something cheap, portable, mass-producible, and able to give infantry protection against tanks at some range beyond point blank. It needed to be something they could carry with them, use in tight spaces, with minimal training, where cumbersome guns couldn't be maneuvered. Very soon, a concept of a recoilless launch tube firing a shaped charge warhead was conceived, something that would serve as a disposable one-shot anti-tank gun. They struggled during testing with backblast and armor penetration effectiveness, but by 1943 they had worked out the solution, and the first model, the Panzerfaust 30, was pushed into production. The Germans wanted to arm the infantry with these as much as possible, as they faced the ever-growing threat from Soviet tanks, but also from American Shermans, which were ramping up their production. So, they fielded the first Panzerfaust, tried it out in combat, and the immediate positive results spurred an expansion of production lines to make as many more as possible. They wanted to give every German soldier a chance, although not the best one in the world, still a chance against enemy armor. So, now before describing their actual use in combat and what they immediately did, let's first explain how the first one worked, because it's quite interesting. There isn't much too complicated about it. At its core, it was a single-shot, recoilless launcher with a preloaded warhead. The disposable steel tube was factory-packed with black powder propellant, and on top of it sat the warhead. When a soldier wanted to fire, he would rest the tube on his shoulder or under his arm, flip up the leaf sight, and squeeze the trigger bar. This ignited a small primer, then the main propellant charge, which launched the warhead forward while ejecting the blast out the rear to even the recoil. This way, it had almost no recoil at all, but it created a vicious backblast behind the tube that was actually deadly to anyone within about 10 meters directly behind. The red warning labels on the tube translated to "Danger, intense fire blast." You definitely wouldn't want to fire it from enclosed spaces unless it was really necessary, because you get burned and concussed. Now, the warhead itself, as we said, was a shaped charge explosive that, upon hitting enemy armor, exploded and focused that energy into a hot jet that could go through 140 to 200 millimeters of armor, depending on the model, like butter. For 1943, this was a staggering penetration capability that could defeat any tank the Allies had at the time, especially if hit from the rear or side. However, actually hitting the tank was the problem, because of its extremely short range. It was basically almost a point-blank weapon, definitely better than running up to a tank to place a mine, but still giving you only about 30 meters if you wanted a decent chance to hit something. The sights had notches calibrated for fixed distances, like 30, 60, and 80 meters. But aiming at a moving tank while under fire was not the easiest thing to do, especially at such short distance. However, the weapon's light weight of just 5 to 7 kilograms meant that one soldier could easily carry one or two, giving him a means of defense if enemy armor approached that close. It was a simple and effective weapon, and it was about to completely change close-quarters tank combat, as you're about to see. The first batches of Panzerfausts reached German infantry on the Eastern Front around September 1943, and they arrived just in time. Soviet tank brigades were spearheading offensive after offensive, and German soldiers more than once found themselves overrun by tank charges. The weapon immediately proved it could knock out T-34s, and it soon became widespread. It was great for defending trenches when tanks approached, but the Germans also created tank hunter teams, or as they called them, Panzerjagdkommando. These were a few soldiers armed with Panzerfausts who would lie in ambush and wait for Soviet tanks to turn their vulnerable sides or rear toward them. Riflemen covered them once they fired, giving them a chance to get away. It was a very effective tactic, since a single cheap disposable weapon could destroy a whole tank that cost money, time, and resources to build, train a crew for, and send to the front. Although effective, it was everything but a safe job to do. And look at this. In the final stage of the war, around 70% of Soviet armor losses were caused not by Tigers and Panthers, not by the infamous 88mm guns, but by cheap disposable Panzerfausts. This was mostly because combat had shifted to towns and cities, and in rubble and narrow streets it was hard to protect tanks from ambushes. The Panzerfaust was just deadly in urban combat, and the Allies tried to protect their tanks in the same way we can see today on modern battlefields, with so-called cope cages. They welded on sheet plates, logs, track links, sandbags, even wire mesh and bed frame skirts, anything that would detonate the warhead away from the main armor. They also avoided sending armor into towns without proper infantry support, which would follow them through the houses and make sure Panzerfaust infantry could not get within effective range. American and British tankers also resented Panzerfausts in Normandy after the D-Day landings, where the bocage terrain was just perfect for such ambushes, like that one you probably remember from the movie Fury. Shermans, Churchills, and tank destroyers were all vulnerable to them, and crews feared them quite a bit. In Normandy, it is estimated that about a third of tanks were knocked out by Panzerfausts, but also by other interesting weapons you are going to hear about. The Panzerfaust went through constant improvements in both range and lethality, and the naming scheme followed its effective range in meters. Each new variant, in theory, was supposed to hit targets that far. The first was the Panzerfaust 30, called Klein, meaning small. It had a 10-centimeter diameter warhead and an effective range of 30 meters, enough to kill a T-34 from the side, but they quickly needed something bigger and better. Then came the Panzerfaust 30 Gross, meaning big with improvements and a larger 15-centimeter warhead. Range was the same, but penetration and explosive power were much better, making it a threat even to heavy tanks. In 1944 came the Panzerfaust 60, which became the most produced model. It had double the range, as the name suggests, although the warhead remained the same. The propellant charge was more than doubled, which helped with range and accuracy. Millions were made by 1945, and it was the most widely used version, especially deadly in urban combat, where it was employed in ambushes against advancing Allied tanks. But that was not the last. The Panzerfaust 100 followed, with even greater range and a 6-kilogram warhead that could penetrate up to 220 millimeters of armor. Precision at 100 meters was more wishful thinking than reality, but it was more than capable of destroying any Allied tank, even with frontal hits. This version, however, mainly saw use in last-ditch defenses as the Nazi regime collapsed and the Allies pushed into the capital. It was used by civilians and the Hitlerjugend, anyone desperate enough to try to damage the Allied effort. None of it was successful enough to change the outcome of the war. There was also the Panzerfaust 150, which was a major redesign. It had a sleeker pointed warhead, 10.5 centimeters in diameter instead of 15, but with improved explosives that gave it penetration of up to 300 millimeters of armor. It used a 2-stage propellant ignition for much higher velocity and better precision, extending the effective range to 150 meters. There was even a clip-on fragmentation sleeve that could be placed over the charge to turn it into an anti-infantry weapon. Upon explosion, it would create shrapnel, and it was designed with a 3-second self-destruct fuse, so if the warhead missed a tank, it would still detonate. In anti-infantry use, it could even act as an airburst. About 100,000 of them were produced in 1945, but luckily for Allied soldiers, they never reached regular units, as the factory was overrun by the Soviets and production was stopped. The final version was intended to be the Panzerfaust 250. This was designed as a reloadable launcher instead of a disposable one-shot, with a pistol grip and electrical firing system, finally beginning to resemble the modern RPGs that would come later. It fired its improved charge faster and would have been a highly effective anti-tank weapon if its production, optimistically planned for September 1945, had ever been realized. However, although the Germans did not have the chance to make this Panzerfaust, Soviet post-war designers took a close look at the concept and, 4 years later in 1949, introduced the RPG-2, a design suspiciously similar to the German Panzerfaust. We also have to mention other German anti-tank weapons, because the Panzerfaust wasn't the only one. The next most important was the Panzerschreck. Panzerschreck literally meant tank terror, which shows how creative they were with names, and it was essentially Germany's bazooka. They created it after examining captured American bazookas, and, just in the style of German engineering, they made it better. It fired an 88mm caliber rocket with a larger warhead of about 3 kilograms of explosive, capable of penetrating up to 200mm of armor, which was the same or better than the Panzerfaust. Unlike the Panzerfaust, this was a reusable rocket launcher with much better range and accuracy. But instead of being operated by one man, it required a dedicated anti-tank team of 2. A gunner and a loader. It even had a shield on the tube to protect the operator's face from the powerful backblast created when the rocket exited. Troops nicknamed it Ofenrohr, meaning stovepipe. Germans used both Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks throughout the war, but Panzerschrecks were more expensive and required a team and some training to use effectively. Then there was the Telemine, a dish-shaped metal mine filled with about 5 kilograms of TNT, buried under the soil and used extensively in defensive belts. In desperate situations, soldiers also sometimes tried to place them directly onto or under tanks during close combat. And there was the magnetic mine we mentioned earlier, which required someone to stick it onto the tank directly. The Allies also had similar anti-tank weapons of their own, and some are worth mentioning because of how unique their operation was. The American bazooka was the standard reusable rocket launcher, introduced already in 1942. It fired a 60mm heat rocket and had a decent but not impressive penetration of about 75 to 100 millimeters. Effective range was much better than the Panzerfaust, up to 150 meters, and it also required a team of 2. Reliability was a problem, since early models used a battery to activate the rocket's propellant charge, and this was sensitive to cold, meaning it wouldn't always fire exactly when you needed it while aiming at an enemy tank. It was also more difficult to use in urban combat because of its longer tube. The Allies actually respected the German Panzerfaust and its simplicity and effectiveness, and used them whenever they had the chance to capture them. Like the Germans, they also used them against bunkers, fortifications, and even infantry, not just against tanks. But the most unique of them was definitely the British PIAT, short for Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. Unlike the Germans with their flashy names, this one was very plain. It was essentially a spigot mortar that lobbed a shaped charge using a powerful spring. This meant no backblast, so it was safe to fire from enclosed spaces, and it didn't reveal the operator's position like Panzerfausts and bazookas did with their sparks and clouds of dust. It had similar penetration to the American bazooka, but its realistically effective range was up to only 50 meters. The PIAT came with a heavy recoil from the spring, which slammed directly into the shooter's shoulder, and it weighed 32 pounds, so it wasn't exactly easy to carry. In theory, the recoil should recock the spring after firing, preparing it for the next round. So, in theory, the operator needed to manually cock it only once. In practice, however, this didn't always work. When it failed, a soldier had to stand up, place the PIAT vertically, and step on the shoulder pad while pulling the spring back with both arms to reset it. Check. Confirm if the PIAT also used a small propellant charge in addition to the spring energy to launch the bomb, as some sources mention both forces working together. Because of these issues, British troops had a love-hate relationship with the PIAT. The Soviets didn't have their own version of what we now know as the RPG during the war. They used anti-tank rifles heavily. Although their effectiveness dropped later in the conflict, they also relied on more creative and brutal methods like Molotov cocktails and satchel charges. Like the Western Allies, they loved using captured German Panzerfausts whenever they could. They did experiment with the RPG-1, but it came too late to see action. Allied handheld anti-tank weapons never matched the German ones in quantity, simplicity, or sheer effectiveness, but they didn't really need to. They had more tanks anyway, while the Germans had to come up with ways to give their infantry the best fighting chance once the war turned against them. As the war entered its final phase, we come to the darkest use of the Panzerfaust. They were handed out to the Volkssturm, which literally meant People's Storm Militia. This was essentially anyone between 16 and 60 years old who could hold a weapon. They were instructed that they were now the last line of defense of the Reich, like in Berlin itself during the final battle. Old men, children, women, anyone who had two working hands and could aim and fire a Panzerfaust was armed and given the briefest of instructions on how to use it against Allied armor at their doorsteps. Many of them died in desperate attempts, but many others accounted for a significant number of destroyed Allied tanks.